This happened about a year ago. I'm 44, I live alone, and I work a regular office job. Without going into too much personal detail, I went through some stuff a few years back and ended up needing a fresh start, so I bought a house. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath in a quiet suburb, end of a cul-de-sac, nothing special. I've been renting apartments my whole adult life, and this was my first time owning, so the whole thing felt like a big deal to me, even though the house itself is pretty modest. When I did the walkthrough with my realtor, we checked every room, opened every closet, the whole thing. At one point, she pulled down the attic hatch in the hallway ceiling, one of those folding ladder ones, and I climbed up and looked around. Unfinished, plywood floor in the center, insulation along the edges, hot and dusty. There was nothing up there. I climbed back down and we moved on, and I don't think I thought about the attic even once for the next several months after that. I moved in, got settled, started my routine. 3 days in the office, 2 days working from home. I'd cook, I'd watch TV, I'd go to bed. First couple months were honestly great. It was quiet, and it was mine, and that was exactly what I needed. I should probably mention a few things about the house, since they become relevant later. The hallway on the second floor runs from the bedrooms to the bathroom, and right in the middle of it, in the ceiling, is the attic hatch. You have to reach up and pull this little handle to bring the ladder down. It's one of those things you walk under 20 times a day and never think about. The hallway also has old hardwood floors that creak if you step on certain spots, which I mention because it matters. I also want to be clear about how consistent my routine was during this time, because that matters too. On the days I drove to the office, I'd leave around 8 and get home around 6:30. On the days I worked from home, I'd be at my desk with headphones on for most of the day. I ate the same stuff, I went to bed around the same time, and I generally didn't deviate much. I wasn't having people over, I wasn't going out, I was just living my life on a pretty predictable schedule. I'm only mentioning this because, looking back, somebody could have learned my entire routine within a week or two just by watching. I don't remember exactly when things started being off. That's actually what bugs me the most about this whole thing. There was no single moment where I thought something was wrong. It was more like I slowly started noticing things that didn't quite add up, and each one on its own was easy enough to explain away. But they kept accumulating. The food was the first thing. I'm pretty boring when it comes to groceries. I buy the same stuff every week, I eat about the same amount, and I've been doing it long enough that I have a general sense of how long things last. So when I opened my fridge one morning, and the bread was way more gone than it should have been, I noticed. I'd made maybe 2 or 3 sandwiches that week, and the bag was over half empty. I stood there looking at it, trying to figure out if I'd somehow eaten more than I remembered, and I decided I probably had, and I moved on. I honestly didn't think about it again for a few days. Then the eggs. Bought a dozen on Sunday. Thursday morning I opened the carton, and there were 4 left. I used 2 eggs for breakfast, and I'd had breakfast 3 times, which is 6 eggs, which should have left me 6. I counted them again because I didn't believe what I was seeing, and then I actually went and looked in the trash and counted the shells, and there were exactly 6 shells in there, which matched the 3 breakfasts I'd made. But 4 eggs in the carton plus 6 shells is only 10, not 12. 2 eggs just weren't accounted for. I remember standing in my kitchen with the carton in one hand and the trash bag pulled open in the other, counting shells again, because the math made no sense. But it wasn't like I was going to call the police over 2 missing eggs. I closed the carton and put it back and tried to move on. After that, I started paying attention. And once I started, it was everywhere. Peanut butter going down too fast. Crackers I'd opened the day before being half gone. Milk running out days ahead of when it should. Every time, I'd run through the logic and try to make it my fault. Maybe I had a snack and forgot about it. Maybe I poured a bigger glass than I thought. I kept doing this for weeks, just explaining it away, because the only other possibility was that somebody else was eating my food, which made no sense. I live alone. No pets, no roommate, nobody, just me. Then stuff started moving, and this is where I really started questioning myself. I came downstairs one morning, and one of my kitchen chairs was pulled out from the table. Not way out, just maybe a foot, angled a little bit, like somebody had been sitting in it. I push those chairs in every night. It's automatic. I don't think about it. My hands just do it. But there it was, pulled out. I pushed it back in and tried not to think about it. Few days later, it happened again. Different chair. Then the remote was on the coffee table when I always leave it on the couch. Then a towel in the bathroom was hanging on a different rack. None of these things individually are that strange, and I was aware of that. But when you live by yourself, you know where things are. There's nobody else to blame when stuff moves. So either I was doing things and not remembering, or something else was going on. And at the time, I was way more worried about the first option. My toothbrush disappeared on a Wednesday. I used it that morning before driving to work. And when I came home, it wasn't in the holder. I looked in the drawers, on the counter, on the floor behind the toilet. It was just gone. I bought a new one the next day and told myself it must have fallen in the trash, and I accidentally threw it out, which is technically possible, but feels like a stretch. A few days after that, a pair of earbuds vanished off my nightstand overnight. They were the cheap wired ones that came with my phone. Not worth anything, not something anyone would steal. But they were there when I went to bed, and they were gone in the morning, and I tore apart my bedroom looking for them, and never found them. Then my old iPod went missing from my junk drawer, which I know was in there because I'd seen it literally the day before when I was looking for a pair of scissors. I opened the drawer, and the spot where the iPod always sat, wedged between a roll of tape and some takeout menus, was just empty. At this point, I actually sat down one evening and Googled whether it's normal to start losing my memory in my 40s. I spent like an hour reading articles about early cognitive decline and comparing symptoms to what I was experiencing, and I genuinely convinced myself that something was wrong with my brain. That felt like a more reasonable explanation to me than what was actually happening. But around this same time, and I didn't connect it to the missing stuff until much later, I started doing things I couldn't really explain. I'd walk into a room and stop in the doorway for a second before going in, like I was waiting for something. I started turning lights on before I entered rooms, even during the day, even rooms with windows. I'd be walking down the hallway and I'd slow down near the bathroom and glance in, not looking for anything specific, just glancing, and then keep walking. I didn't think of it as being nervous. It wasn't conscious. My body was just doing things my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I went around and checked every door and window in the house, all locked. I walked the perimeter outside looking for any signs someone had tried to get in. Pry marks, scratches, anything. Nothing. Everything looked completely normal. I changed the locks anyway. Both doors, new deadbolts, new knob sets, new keys that nobody else had copies of. For 3 days after that, nothing happened. Nothing moved, nothing disappeared. And I started feeling like the locks had been the problem all along. Maybe somebody from the previous owner's life had a copy and was coming in during the day for whatever reason. Made sense. New locks. Problem fixed. 4 days after the lock change, I came home and a kitchen chair was pulled out again. I went through the whole house. Every window locked. Both doors locked. Garage sealed. Nothing else out of place. Just that chair. And I'm standing there in my kitchen with my keys in my hand, staring at this chair. And I cannot figure out how it got that way. That was the first night I checked behind the shower curtain before using the bathroom. I didn't decide to do it. I just did it. Pulled it back, looked at the empty tub, let it go. And then I stood there for a second feeling stupid about it. But the next night I did it again. After that I started hearing things. And I know how that sounds, but just bear with me. Creaks from the ceiling. A soft thump from above me while I was watching TV. I blamed the house because that's what you do. It's an older house, wood frame, and older houses make noise when the temperature changes. I told myself that, and it was a perfectly reasonable explanation, and I believed it for a while. But the noises kept happening at specific times, which is what eventually got to me. Late at night, usually an hour or so after I went to bed, and sometimes during the day when I was working from home with headphones on. I'd take the headphones off to go to the bathroom or grab water, and I'd catch the tail end of something from above me. A creak, a thud, something. And by the time I was standing there listening, it was over. One night I was in bed scrolling my phone, and I heard what sounded like weight shifting on wood directly above me, almost like someone rolling over. I stared at my ceiling for a while, and it didn't happen again, and I told myself it was the HVAC. Another time I was in the shower, and I could have sworn I heard a floorboard creak in the hallway. I shut the water off and stood there dripping, listening, and there was nothing. I ended up calling a pest control company because I figured if there were raccoons or squirrels in the attic, that would explain everything, and I could stop worrying. I actually felt relieved making the appointment, like I'd finally taken a concrete step toward solving the problem. The guy came out on a Friday afternoon, climbed up through the hatch with a flashlight, was up there for maybe 10 minutes. I could hear him walking around up there, and at one point he sneezed, which for some reason made me feel better, like it confirmed the space was just a normal, dusty attic. He came back down and told me he didn't find any signs of animal activity. No droppings, no nesting material, no chew marks on the wood. He said it was probably just the house settling, which was the same thing I'd been telling myself for weeks. I paid him $75 and he left, and I remember feeling kind of embarrassed for calling him in the first place. That night, right around 1 in the morning, I heard a thud from above my bedroom, and then a slow creak. And then another creak about 10 seconds later, and then nothing. I lay there and listened for a while, maybe 20 minutes, and it didn't happen again. I told myself it was the HVAC cycling. This went on for weeks. The food kept going faster than it should have. A bar of soap in the shower that normally lasts me a month was gone in 2 weeks. Toilet paper was running out too fast. One evening I grabbed my bath towel and it was damp, which wouldn't be unusual except I hadn't showered that day. I remember standing in my bathroom, holding this damp towel and just not knowing what to think. There were a few things during this period that were harder to explain away. I came home from work one day, and the TV was on a different input than I'd left it on. I always leave it on HDMI 1. It was on HDMI 3, which I don't even use for anything. I went through the settings trying to figure out if there was some kind of auto switch feature, and there wasn't. Another time I came home and there was a glass on my kitchen counter next to the sink, with a little bit of water in the bottom. I hadn't used a glass that morning. I'd had coffee in my travel mug and left. The glass was just sitting there. The toilet seat thing is the one that really got to me, and I realize how ridiculous this sounds. But I leave the seat up. I live alone. There's no reason for me to put it down. And I came home one day and it was down. I stood there looking at it, and I couldn't even make myself come up with an explanation. There wasn't one. I started doing this thing around this time where I'd come home from work and just stand in the front doorway for a few seconds before going inside. Not listening for anything specific, just standing there. And at night, when I was getting ready for bed, I'd find myself pausing in the hallway and looking at the attic hatch in the ceiling. I don't know what I was expecting to see. It looked exactly the same as it always did. But I'd catch myself standing under it, looking up at it, and I'd have to make myself keep walking. And when I turned the lights off at night, I started doing it fast. Like I'd be in the living room, and I'd hit the switch, and then walk quickly to the bedroom, instead of walking at normal speed. I don't think I even realized I was doing it at first. It was just this thing that started happening. Around this same time, I was working from home one afternoon, sitting at my desk with headphones in, and I heard the hallway floor creak right outside my door. Not from above me, from the hallway, maybe 6 feet from where I was sitting. I pulled my headphones off and listened, and there was nothing. I got up, checked the hallway, checked every door. Everything locked. Empty house. But I couldn't make myself put the headphones back on after that. I worked the rest of the afternoon without them, and I kept the door open. After that, I started spending more time away from home. Not consciously. I just started staying later at the office, going to the gym on days I normally wouldn't, eating dinner out. I wasn't thinking about it as avoiding my own house, but looking back, that's exactly what I was doing. The house just didn't feel right anymore. I'd come home and it would feel like somebody had just been there. And I know that probably sounds crazy, but it was this feeling I couldn't shake, like the air had been moved around recently. I can't explain it any better than that. I actually started leaving the TV on when I went to work. I told myself it was for background noise, so the house wouldn't feel so quiet when I got home. But really, I think part of me hoped the noise would discourage whoever was in there. I didn't admit that to myself at the time. I wasn't ready to admit there was someone to discourage. A friend of mine named Chris is the one who suggested the camera. I was out with him on a Friday night, and I ended up telling him the whole thing, all of it. The food, the missing items, the noises, the chair, the toilet seat, the glass on the counter, the hallway creak. I hadn't told anyone up to that point because I figured they'd either think I was paranoid or tell me to just move. And I didn't want to hear either of those things. But Chris was the kind of guy who takes stuff seriously, and I halfway expected him to laugh, but he didn't. He just listened, and when I was done, he asked me why I hadn't set up a camera. Not a full security system, just a small wireless camera I could check from my phone. I felt pretty stupid for not thinking of it myself. Like all this time I'd been worrying and Googling cognitive decline and changing locks. And the obvious answer was just to point a camera at the problem and see what's actually happening. The next day I went out and bought 2 of them. They're about the size of a phone charger, and that's actually what they're designed to look like. You plug them into a wall outlet, and they just sit there, totally inconspicuous. They connect to your Wi-Fi and send motion alerts to your phone whenever they detect movement. I read a bunch of reviews before picking them, and these ones had good night vision, which I figured was important since most of the weird stuff seemed to happen while I was asleep. I put one in the kitchen, plugged into an outlet by the microwave, aimed at the table and most of the floor. I put the other one in the hallway, low outlet near the bathroom, covering the hall and part of the living room. I tested them both, walked in front of them, made sure the picture was clear and the notifications were hitting my phone. Everything worked. I set them up on a Friday, had a normal night, made dinner, watched a few episodes of something, went to bed around 11:30. Checked the app before I fell asleep. Both feeds were live. House was empty. I put my phone on the nightstand and passed out. I woke up to my phone buzzing. Not an alarm, not a call. It was notification after notification stacking up on my lock screen from the camera app. The first one was time-stamped 2:47 a.m., and it was currently a little after 3. I opened the first alert, which was from the kitchen camera. The image had that gray-green infrared look, since all the lights were off. And there was someone standing in front of my open refrigerator. My brain didn't really process it at first. I just stared at my phone. I was looking at a person in my kitchen. A man, based on the build. Medium height, thin, wearing a dark hoodie and sweatpants. He had the fridge door open and he was reaching inside. And the thing that made my stomach drop was how casual he was about it. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't looking around. He was just reaching into my fridge like he was in his own house. I swiped to the next alert. Same camera, a few minutes later. He was standing at my kitchen counter with his back to the camera, and I could see his shoulders moving. He was making something. Standing at my counter in the dark, making food. And he wasn't using lights. He was moving around my kitchen in pitch darkness, like he knew exactly where everything was, which meant he'd done this enough times that he didn't need lights anymore. Next one was the hallway camera. Same guy, walking down my hallway toward the living room, bare feet on the hardwood. Not tiptoeing, not being careful, just walking. And I realized while watching it that the creaks I'd been hearing from the ceiling at night weren't the house. They were his footsteps, every single time. Next one, hallway again, about 10 minutes later. He was heading toward the bathroom. The camera caught him going in, and based on the timestamps between that alert and the next one, he was in there for about 6 minutes. My bathroom, my shower, my soap, my towel. I thought about every time I'd grabbed my towel and it was damp, and told myself I was imagining things. Next alert. Kitchen camera. He was sitting in one of my chairs at my table, eating whatever he'd made. Just sitting there in the dark in my kitchen, eating my food. I could see the shape of his jaw moving. I went back to the first clip and watched it again. I don't know why. I think part of me was still trying to make it not real. Like if I watched it enough times, it would turn out to be a shadow or a glitch. But it wasn't. It was a person. In my kitchen. And watching it the second time, I noticed the timestamp. 2:47 a.m. And that's when something hit me that I wish hadn't. Because I remembered getting up that night. I remembered waking up thirsty, checking my phone, seeing it was around 10 to 3, and walking to the kitchen for water. I remember standing at the sink filling a glass. The kitchen was empty, but according to the camera, at 2:47, 3 minutes before I got up, he was standing at my refrigerator, which means he heard me coming. He heard my bedroom door open, or he heard my feet on the hardwood, and he went back up before I got there. We were both awake in my house at the same time, moving around in the dark, and I missed him by maybe 90 seconds. I kept scrolling. Next one. Hallway camera. He was walking past the bathroom toward the back of the house, toward the bedrooms. And then the last alert I looked at. Same camera. He was standing in the hallway. Not walking, just standing there, facing my bedroom door, arms at his sides. The timestamp said 3:04 a.m. The previous motion alert, the one of him walking toward the bedrooms, was at 3:02. So he walked to my door and then just stopped, and stood there, for close to 2 minutes, based on when the next alert triggered from him finally moving again. I stared at that clip for a long time. I watched it 3 or 4 times. Him just standing there, not moving. My door right in front of him. I could see the door handle in the frame and I kept looking at it, trying to see if it moved, if he reached for it. He didn't. He just stood there. But 2 minutes is a long time to stand in a dark hallway looking at a closed door. That's not someone passing by. That's someone thinking about something. I put my phone down and I sat there in bed and I listened. The house was completely quiet. My bedroom door was right there. 6 inches of wood with no lock on it. I didn't know if he was behind it. I didn't know if he was in the hallway or the kitchen, or back up in the attic, or standing 3 feet from me on the other side of the door. The most recent notification was from about 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes is enough time for him to be anywhere. I called 911 from my bed. I whispered the whole thing. My address. Someone is in my house. Please send someone. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was and keep the line open. At some point, I grabbed the baseball bat from my closet, and I honestly don't remember getting up to get it. It was just in my hands. I sat on the edge of my bed, facing the door with the bat across my knees and the phone to my ear, and I just waited. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking me questions, confirming my address, and I was answering, but I wasn't really processing any of it, because every single part of my brain was focused on my bedroom door. I kept staring at the handle, waiting for it to move. It was probably 9 or 10 minutes before the police showed up, but it felt like an hour. During that time, I heard something above me. Not footsteps exactly, more like weight shifting on plywood. A soft creak. Then nothing. Then another creak. Then what sounded like something being dragged a short distance. And then nothing again. He'd gone back up. He must have heard my phone buzzing, or seen the light from my screen under my door, or something tipped him off, and he went back up to the attic. The thought that he was directly above me right then, that we were separated by nothing but a sheet of drywall and some plywood, and that he knew I was awake now, that was probably the worst part of the whole thing. I don't know what he was thinking up there. I don't know if he was panicking or if he was calm. I just sat there gripping the bat and waiting for it to be over. The police pulled up and I let them in. And I said something like, "There's someone in my attic." And I know I wasn't making much sense because I was shaking and talking too fast. They asked me a few questions, and I was trying to explain the cameras and the footage and show them my phone all at the same time, and I'm sure I sounded insane. They cleared the house room by room, checked the closets, checked behind the doors, and then one of them pulled the attic hatch down and the ladder unfolded, and they went up with their flashlights. I stood at the bottom of the ladder and watched the beams sweep across the space above me. I could hear their boots on the plywood, and I could hear them saying things to each other, but I couldn't make out the words. He was gone. There's a small window at the far end of the attic, at the gable, that I'd honestly forgotten existed. It was open. Not broken, just unlatched and pushed open. One of the officers looked out and said there were fresh scuff marks on the shingles going toward the edge of the roof. He'd heard them coming, gone out the window, dropped off the roof into the backyard, and was gone before they even got to the hatch. But here's what was up there. In the far corner, behind the HVAC ductwork where you couldn't see it from the hatch opening, somebody had been living. A sleeping bag laid out flat on the plywood, a pillow that I recognized from my hallway closet, a gallon jug of water filled from my tap. There was a pile of food wrappers shoved into the corner, weeks worth. Cracker sleeves, bread bags, peanut butter containers, granola bar wrappers, an empty cereal box. All from my kitchen. My toothbrush was up there, sitting on a piece of cardboard next to a tube of my toothpaste, and there were water spots on the cardboard around it. He'd been brushing his teeth with my toothbrush. My earbuds were up there plugged into my iPod, just sitting on the sleeping bag like he'd been using them before going to sleep. I actually recognized the playlist that was loaded on the screen when the officer showed me the photo. It was one of mine. He'd been listening to my music through my earbuds while lying in a sleeping bag 10 feet above my bed. There was also a plastic bag with a change of clothes in it, a phone charger with no phone attached, a flashlight with the batteries removed and set beside it, which the officer said was probably so it wouldn't accidentally turn on and give him away. And leaning against the wall behind the ductwork, a hunting knife. Fixed blade, maybe 7 or 8 inches, with a leather sheath that had a belt clip on it. Not a kitchen knife from my house, something he'd brought with him. Something he already had when he moved in up there. One of the officers asked me if the knife was mine. I told him no, and he bagged it. They asked me how long I thought this had been going on. I tried to think back. The food started being off maybe 6 weeks after I moved in. The toothbrush went missing a few months after that. The noises had been happening for weeks before I even started paying attention to them. I told them I thought it had been months. The officer pointed at the attic window and said that was probably how he was getting in and out. There's a tree close enough to the roof that you could climb up, get on the shingles, and go in through the window without ever touching a door or a window on the main floor. That's why changing the locks didn't help. He was never using the doors. They never caught him. I gave them the camera footage and they took the evidence from the attic. And a detective called me twice in the first week and had me come in and look at some photos. But I didn't recognize anyone. After that, I never heard from them again. I called a few times over the next month and they kept telling me it was still being looked into. And eventually I stopped calling. I sealed the attic window shut with screws and metal brackets. I put a deadbolt on my bedroom door. I installed cameras on every side of the house and a full alarm system with sensors on every door and window. I had the tree trimmed so nothing hangs close enough to the roof to climb. I probably spent more on security in those 2 weeks than I spent on furniture the entire first year I lived there. I still live there. I can't afford to sell it and start over somewhere else, so I stay. I pull the attic hatch down every day, climb the ladder, shine my phone light around. Every corner, every time. I do it before I leave for work, and again before I go to bed. Some nights I hear a creak from the ceiling, and my whole body locks up for a few seconds before I tell myself, it's the house. It's always the house now. There's nothing up there. I've checked. I always check. I keep thinking about the camera footage, about him standing outside my door for 2 minutes. I keep thinking about what the footage looked like on the nights before I set up the cameras, the nights I don't have footage of. Whether he went into my room on those nights, whether he stood over my bed. I'll never know, and honestly, I'm glad I won't. I also keep thinking about the knife, about what it was for, and why someone carries a hunting knife with a belt clip into an attic where they're squatting above a person who doesn't know they're there. I can't come up with a good reason for that. I've tried. But the thing that genuinely keeps me up, the thing I can't stop going back to, is the pest control guy. He was in my attic for 10 minutes on a Friday afternoon with a flashlight. He walked around up there. I heard him walking. I heard him sneeze. And he came back down and told me there was nothing. That was 7 weeks before the camera footage. But the food had been wrong for months before that. Which means when the pest control guy was up there, the sleeping bag was already in the corner behind the ductwork. The food wrappers were there. The clothes were there. The knife was there. All of it, tucked behind the duct, maybe 15 feet from where he was standing with his flashlight. Maybe he just didn't look behind the ductwork. That's the explanation I try to go with. He checked the open areas, didn't see droppings or chew marks, and called it done. He wasn't looking for a person. Why would he be? But I keep coming back to the math. 10 minutes, flashlight, 15 feet away. And he missed a sleeping bag, a pile of food wrappers, a jug of water, and a hunting knife. In 10 minutes, with a flashlight. Unless he didn't miss it. Unless there was someone lying in that sleeping bag in the dark, not moving, not breathing too loud, watching the flashlight beam sweep across the plywood a few feet away. The pest control guy up there walking around, checking the insulation, checking the wood, and a man lying 10 feet from him with a knife, waiting for him to leave. That's the thing I think about when I can't sleep. Not whether it happened. I'll never know whether it happened. But the fact that it could have. That both of them might have been up there at the same time. One of them with a flashlight, and the other one in the dark. And only one of them knew.
If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing. There's always another one coming.